How many times are we tested? It feels as if we're tested several times a day, not just once a week or once a month, but every day through little things that happen that we'd rather they didn't, and the things that we want to happen don't seem to happen. And so everything becomes a trial. And of course, if I try to fix things on the external level, maybe I succeed sometimes, but maybe I don't always. And some things actually can't be fixed just by doing things on the external level. Maybe it's a change of heart from my side. Maybe it's a change of perception, my understanding of how things are. And perhaps changing things inside myself can make things seem better. I'm thinking about health. And just this afternoon, within the last half hour, I've heard of 2 individuals who've been through major physical illnesses. But from both sides, I heard a story from one of the sisters here. She shared how she'd been feeling unwell for a couple of days. And she spoke to God. And she said to God, sitting in meditation, well, the hospital doesn't seem to know what's wrong, but you have to guide me to the right place. And she was here and she drove back thinking she'd go home. But instead, the car seemed to go in a different direction and took her to her son's home. And there was a hospital nearby, and long story short, but again, they found that she had 4 blockages and they were able to deal with it. And she's fine, she's active again. And I heard another story soon after that, a little bit similar, but again, fine and well now. So it seems as if it's a time when, if you think about this as the car and the soul as the driver, it seems that cars seem to be failing in so many different ways today. I know that after COVID especially, many things seem to be more complicated than they were pre-COVID times in terms of health issues. Won't go down the long journey there, but just to say that health issues seem to be becoming more and more of a situation, and they seem to come earlier and earlier. I remember when I was 60, I'm 75 now, so 60 seems a long time ago. But at that time, I had cataract surgery in both eyes. And I thought to myself, well, it's happened rather early. Usually you hear of people in their 70s having cataract things. And then just a short while after that, about 5 years later, one of my younger sisters, she's in her 50s, and she had cataract surgery. And I thought, things are moving very rapidly in the wrong direction. And so it's a reality that the state of the world, in terms of pollution, in terms of stress, in terms of tension, all of these things have increased dramatically in the last few years. And so all of them take their toll. And so how do we deal with it all? Yes, whatever needs to happen on the external level. So yes, go to the doctor, go to the hospital, do whatever it is you need to do. But the way you deal with it is not just the tablets or the surgery. It really depends on the state of mind, the state of consciousness. And if I do take it in that way, what am I learning from this? How do I deal with this? Can I take God's power, God's light, God's love, and deal with it in that awareness? it's going to be a very different outcome. And it's going to be a challenge that I'm able to deal with much more easily than otherwise. So often what we've done in today's world is we've put God to one side, and maybe God becomes part of our life either once a week, or when there's a wedding ceremony, or when somebody dies. It's at times like this that we think about God. But in fact, just as I have a relationship with people I'm close to, is it possible for me to bring God right into the heart of everything that I do? And what would be the difference this would make? I know that for myself, through my teenage years, studying physics, chemistry, biology, and all the other R's and stuff, but especially those three science subjects, I had a big question about God. And I was very fortunate that soon after that, some years later, 14, I decided I'm not going to think about God because I'm not getting answers to my questions. And age 18, I started to get answers to my questions. And so that started me on the journey, which continues till now. And so sometimes we put God away aside and say, well, let me get on with the things that I think are important today. But what I think is important today is relative, because if I'm putting just the external things as important, then the more subtle things, which are actually the foundation for my life, they get forgotten, they get left behind. And so spirituality means bringing the awareness of what is really important back into my life. And together with that, for myself, of course, then the relationship with the divine. I remember running a retreat at one point, and we were taking up the subject of soul. And it's quite easy to understand that there's a being that's thinking, feeling, remembering, aware, personality. None of these things are tangible physically, but they are real. It's our experience, I think, I feel, I remember. And so the non-physical being, the soul, is the being that is going through all of these experiences. And so one can very easily come to that awareness. And if I think about the Supreme Being also as a soul, a being of light, but a difference that every soul has limited capacity, has goodness, and the goodness is expressed through the love, the peace, the joy, the purity. These are the original qualities of that inner being. And everyone different, everyone unique, and so different combinations of these different qualities, but definitely everyone with all of these qualities of goodness within the being. And so it's fairly easy to come to understand that. But just a step further is to think about a being who has all positive attributes to their nth degree, absolutely complete, and all these qualities to an unlimited extent, and also a constant extent. Humans, one day there's love, another day it might change. One day there's joy, and there's definitely changes from moment to moment. But the Supreme, the one who has absolute love, absolute truth, absolute joy, the one who's able to have so much that there's an endless flow that can reach every single human being, no matter how many billions of us there may be. And so it's a very simple understanding of God. But when I came to understand that being, it made a huge difference to my life. But at this particular retreat, it was people who had gathered together to study Raj Yoga. And so soul was easy. And then Supreme Soul, not so difficult, understanding it in a simple way. But also, we had a little exercise in that. And I asked them to take a sheet of paper and put in the middle just the dot, the soul, a being of light, the dot. In the middle of the sheet, just put the dot to represent yourself. And then around yourself, put all the relationships that are the most meaningful and the closest to you. Yeah? I'm not giving you sheets of paper, but take it through in your mind. And then the next circle. The people that you're connected with, but you see from time to time when you need them, like your doctor, your dentist, and so on. And then in the next circle, the people you're connected with, but you meet them infrequently. Maybe just at Christmas, at Diwali, maybe just on festival occasions. And they did all of this. And it was a group of about 60 people. And I asked them, where did they put God? And God was nowhere. And we'd just been through a talk about a relationship with the divine. And yet, after that, still, but it was the reality. We don't think about having a living relationship with the divine. And so I think all our trials and tribulations really would take on a very, very different experience if we were to make that connection and learn how to be able to have not just a connection. Connection is the first step, but beyond just a connection, a living relationship with a being who is truly the one with whom we can have an eternal relationship. Any other relationship is always going to be some years part of my life, not through beginning, through the middle to the end. It's not possible. But the relationship with the divine is an eternal one. And so the example of health issues and my personal experience with Dadi Janki, Dadi Gulzar, both of them have visited this place many times, but also all of you would have seen Sister Chandru. Who did not see Sister Chandru? Anyone who did not know Sister Chandru? Just a few. In fact, yeah, just a few. And these souls all went through many, many different illnesses. But we would say that the illness is the illness of the physical body, and the soul can either be impacted by that in a very negative way, and there's complaints, why does this happen to me always? Why me? You can take it with frustration and irritation and all the negative aspects, the complaints that people have about themselves or about the lack of help and support they're receiving, all of this. And so the medicine's going to maybe get the body healed, but the soul feels as if it's still suffering. And yet the people that I've mentioned, the yogis, all of them went through illnesses, but the way they handled the illnesses was different. And even during their period of illness, they would still continue to serve. And they would have the courage, the faith, the power to be able to uplift others. You know, you go to visit a patient and you have to take them flowers or fruits or whatever it is that you think is going to make them feel better. Well, we didn't have to do that with these people. Whoever went to them left inspired and uplifted by them. They didn't come to uplift the yogis. The yogis were able to uplift them. So health issues seem to be a big situation that everybody's dealing with in some form or another. If not me, then somebody who's closely related to me. And the other issue that seems to be actually at the very heart of many, many troubles that we have is something that should actually be bringing us great joy and happiness, but it doesn't seem to work that way somehow. And that is relationships. When we run workshops on stress anywhere in the world, and we ask people, well, what is the main factor for stress in your life? Do you know the term most people use that comes top of the list, actually? Relationships. So the purpose of relationships is that give and take, that exchange in which there should be happiness and love. And instead it becomes a source of anger, of bitterness, and even worse. And so again, one very, very simple thing that Raj Yoga teaches, and in fact all traditions teach in some form or another, change one single word. Instead of taking, can I start giving? Very simple. But as I say, although it's acknowledged in all traditions, to start doing it requires something else. And what it requires further is for me to be able to become full enough so that I am able to give. If I'm half empty and the person I'm connected with needs something, I try and give, but I don't have enough for myself. I'm already only half full myself. So I don't have the capacity to be able to give anything. Or I give a little bit and then I stop. I have nothing more. One of the things we noticed during COVID was that the first year, the people who were in the caring professions and in the serving professions, they gave. By the time the second year came round, we were beginning to see a deficit of compassion because people were exhausted, they were tired, they had given everything they could, and they had nothing more. And so then you tell somebody who's empty to give, then of course it's going to take a toll on that individual. And after that, we saw this huge escalation of mental health issues in so many different ways. The pressure, the tension, but most of all, the lack of compassion, because there was a deficit by then. And so the situation where I come half full and you come half full, and we have huge expectations of each other, something's got to give somewhere. If there's a string that's not very strong and is being pulled by both sides, at some point it's going to snap. And so when you've got half and half, and you multiply that, you don't get a full, you don't get one, you get a quarter. And so the way to change this, and it is as simple as it sounds, if you try it out for yourself, you'll be able to see the difference. And in a couple of minutes, I want us to experiment with meditation and see how it works. If I can make a connection with the source and draw from the source all that I need for myself, And I keep that connection very close so that it's truly the experience of the being who is my spiritual, eternal mother and father and friend and guide and teacher along the way. If I were to experiment with all of these relationships and take whatever it is I need from the source and fill myself with that, now I don't need to take from you, but rather I'm able to give to you something that would help you. And I'm never going to run out because I'm taking from the source, and there's an endless supply that can reach me. I remember a young doctor meeting Dadi Janki in London in the early days when she had come in the 70s. And he told her that he was going to go to Africa because he had a calling to share his expertise and his experience, and he was going to help people there. And Daddy just gave him good wishes. And about 20 years later, we happened to meet him again. In between, we hadn't met him, but about 20 years later, we did. And this time, he looked much older than his 20 years added on. He really looked worn out and haggard. And he looked at Dadi and he said, Dadi, you actually look younger than when I last saw you. And it's true, her eyes were shining, her skin was glowing. And so you couldn't tell that she was 20 years older physically. And she just smiled. And she asked him how he was. And he said, Daddy, I'm now so exhausted that I can't carry on. I've come to a state of burnout, so I've left Africa to come back here, and I don't know if I'm ever going to have the energy or the enthusiasm or the capacity to go back again, even though there's such a need out there. Daddy, how are you doing? And she said, I don't give. And he said, but you do. I know that that's what your life is. And she said, I don't give. I just simply make myself a channel so that then it comes from above and it reaches whoever is there to receive it. And so it's not something that I am giving, but it's coming from above, but also in between, I'm receiving blessings from the one above, but also I'm receiving blessings from the souls who have benefited. And so the whole subject of relationships and give and take and the exchange of that and how to be able to deal with that has become such an issue today. In India, we didn't hear about divorce until the last 10 years, probably. Now, many, many stories about divorce, but even as late as 10 years earlier, within your own circle, you probably didn't know anybody who was going through that. And so it's not even just a fact that it's East or West, but it's a global situation in which it seems that souls have lost inner strength, inner power, because where there needs to be not just the exchange of give and take in the way that I've described, but also where, for example, it needs a little bit of tolerance, a little bit more understanding. Instead of that, what's coming up is more intolerance and impatience. And so where if I could be a little bit more patient, then maybe all these little things that are troubling me wouldn't be such an issue. And I'd be able to continue and move on. But little things become big things because I lack that power to be able to accommodate the other, to tolerate little things, or to adjust in situations. And so I need to be able to refill my own inner battery so that I can cope with all of these things that are going on. And if I can do that, then yes, there's going to be a big difference. The other word that we use so frequently is the word misunderstanding, where there should be understanding and not just understanding what the other is saying, but more the understanding of what they're feeling. What is it that they're going through? Can I have that empathy in which I can experience what it is they're going through so that I can help them? But rather, instead of any empathy or understanding, one misunderstanding leads to another and another and another, and it becomes very, very complex. And to try and sort it out becomes very challenging. And so, how can I develop that clarity of mind in which, when you speak, I'm able to keep the chatter of the monkey inside here quiet so that I can actually listen and understand? It's interesting, silence and listen have the same letters. And so if I keep myself silent, I can then listen and hear what it is you want me to understand. And where this is chattering away, it's challenging what you're saying. Oh, it's because this person's like this. That's why they're talking to me like this. Or all the other stuff that goes on in here. But to be quiet, listen, and understand, and then respond in a way that's appropriate. Again, it needs a boot up of my own inner spiritual capacity so that I'm able to develop the quality of silence and the ability to listen. So, how do we make all this work? First step, the awareness of the inner being, my spiritual identity. Second step, my relationship with the divine, so that I'm able to connect and draw that quality that I need within my own life. Let's have a little experiment. And you've all been sitting, listening, very alert and very quiet. Thank you. But just let both feet be on the ground so that the body is balanced. And you're already shuffling in your seat to make sure that your back is straight, it's upright. Take a deep breath. And I go on an inner journey. And I watch my thoughts. And simply watching my thoughts slows them down. And now I can select one thought. The thought of peace. And in this awareness of peace, I feel comfortable. It feels familiar. And it is as if in this awareness of peace, a door has opened and I can sense the presence of the Supreme. and from the being who is the supreme emanates light, which is the light of love, the light of purity. And I absorb the peace, the purity, and the moment that it reaches me, I absorb it within myself. And I absorb this love, this light, this purity. I realize that this is who I am. I am a being of peace. I absorb from each one the specialities that they have. And I connect with each one on a deeply spiritual level. And I feel myself as I continue to do this, the process of transformation allows the goodness within the soul to emerge. The light of peace, the light of love from the divine. I keep this light shining brightly within myself. And I come back to the awareness of the world around me, the physical dimension. But I keep this connection. Thank you for joining the experiment. And perhaps it made you relax, which is good. But my hope is that as you experiment with this more and more, you will feel the results of it in your life in a very practical way. I want to talk about another issue that all of us are facing, the issue of climate change. And the bad news is that climate change scientists are saying that we've already crossed about 7 of the tipping points that they say really mean that we're going to face an existential crisis. And there's 15 tipping points that they describe, and we've crossed 7 of them. But the other question is, what difference can I make? Can I make a difference, or am I going to say, well, this is the state of the world and what can we do about it? And we just sit back and say, well, let life carry on as usual. And life gets more and more difficult. There are more storms, more heat waves, more wildfires. And I still say, well, there's nothing that can be done. Well, spirituality says that we've created the problem. It's definitely not God who decided to send a disaster to the world. But even as we were creating it, the first time that scientists spoke about climate change was in 1972. That is a long time ago. And they told us what we needed to do. And the news at that time didn't reach the masses because things were still projected 50 years further and beyond. And governments didn't want to do anything about it because if governments try to change anything, nobody's going to vote for them in the next election. And that's more important for them than looking further ahead. So nothing happened. And it's only since the last few years that the climate skeptics have stopped talking. But the climate skeptics aren't talking anymore. But the oil and gas companies are sending more and more people to these conferences. Just a few statistics, because I've been involved with this for all these years since 2009 now. When we had the COP in Glasgow, which would have been 23, 22, no, 21. That was in 21. I read a very interesting fact, and that is that the Marshall Islands, which are in danger of being submerged, were only able to afford to send 2 people to the climate change conference. That's it. The whole island sent its president and 1 other person. Do you know how many people were there from the oil and gas industry? 560 plus. And so what were they doing in the climate change conference? As you can imagine. And then in the next one in Egypt, the number was larger. And then in Dubai last year, and a lot of revenue comes from the refineries that are there. The person who was the president of the main oil company of Dubai was also asked to be by the Dubai government to be the president of the COP. And when there was an outcry, he resigned, but I'm sure he's back in the saddle again. But they had over 1,000 people from the oil and gas industry in Dubai. And the result was, as was to be expected, that there was no proper commitment about changing anything. So, what's going on? Money speaks louder than common sense. Never mind science, but just basic common sense. So, what do we do about it? Can I start looking at the subject of respecting nature and being able to turn things around for myself, that I can actually respect nature instead of aggressing nature, exploiting nature, just simply taking from nature? Just imagine nature, the earth, the air, the water, everything has supplied us with such immense generosity that humanity has been able to survive for millennia. Everything that we have, all the resources that we say are ours, actually trace it back, and it comes from the earth and whatever nature has provided. And we never take that into consideration. We count our dollars and cents, but where did it ultimately come from? Track it, track it, track it, track it, and it's nature and what nature has given without any cost to humanity. And here we are destroying our own nest and just simply expecting that nature is going to give back to us again and again and again. And what we've done meanwhile is change the total balance of the ecostructure, the ecosystem, to a point where it's now at the point where it's collapsing. Can I come back to a situation in which I'm able to respect nature? And if together, even if it's a small minority, rather than the huge majority of the world's population, even that small minority can actually make a difference. Many years ago, Margaret Mead said, the only changes that have happened in the world in a positive direction have been made possible when a small group of committed individuals have taken up a cause that's close to their hearts. And that has brought positive change. Look back and you'll see how true that is. In the same way, if a group of us decide we're going to change our relationship with nature, and instead of violence against nature, we're going to now respect nature and create a relationship with nature in which we can give nature respect and love and peace, definitely that imbalance would be put right. But where does respect come from? And this word respect would also actually change our whole relationship with humans also. And spirituality says everything starts from inside and comes outside. Agree? If you squeeze an orange and you squeeze it and you squeeze it and you squeeze it, what will it give you? It'll give you what it's got, orange juice. It's not going to give you coffee. It's not going to give you tea. It's going to give you orange juice. And so even if there are challenging circumstances, if I have filled myself with peace from above, then no matter how hard the circumstances may be, what will I share? I'll share what I carry inside, and that is peace, nothing else, just peace. So if I carry respect for myself, then what I'm going to do is to share respect with everything and everyone else around me. But this is one of the big, big issues in today's world. We lack self-esteem. We lack self-respect. So we go through fluctuations of inferiority and superiority complexes. And we find that things get twisted up. And so how do I get back to a state where I can respect myself rather than expecting respect from others? But if I have my own respect and I stay stable in my own inner dignity, I wouldn't be troubled by gender issues, by race issues, by differences of culture, differences of religion. Nothing would shake my stability. And I'd be able to respect nature. And so when I come back to the consciousness of my original state of being. And in silence, with meditation, I've been able to catch a glimpse of the goodness of the soul. And every tradition tells us that we were created in the image of the Creator, and the Creator is goodness. And if we've been created in that same image, we carry that goodness within ourselves. And so, if I can have a glimpse of that through silence, through meditation, reflection, contemplation, whatever, I'd again begin to see the values I carry within the soul. And especially when I start following those values in my life, that would definitely raise my self-esteem. I know myself better than anybody else in the room knows me. And so when my core values or my goodness is something I'm aware of, but I don't experience it and I don't put it through into my practice in my life, I see myself moving further and further away from my own core values. Doesn't matter whether somebody else has seen it or not, but I know my own self-esteem goes down. And I need to do something to be able to restore it again. And to restore it, silence, but also being able to start following those values in my life, which means drawing that spiritual power, that strength from the divine. So often we know that the best policy is honesty. It's a statement we make. But how often do I follow it through? It's not convenient. It's going to be a problem. Let me just say white lie. But I've diverted from the truth. And next time, maybe I'll divert even more and even more and even more. There's an addiction cycle, not just substance addictions, but the addiction cycle inside us, the habits that I have in terms of the things that I do. My conscience speaking, and I put it down, I don't listen. And so my self-esteem goes down further and further. And when I start the other process, let me listen to that inner voice. Let me draw power from the divine and actually start doing what I know I should. My own value for myself rises. My self-esteem rises. I'm able to start respecting myself and maybe even loving myself. If I learn to love myself, a lot of problems would be resolved. They say that, well, the commandment is love others as you would love yourself. And to what extent do I love myself? I don't. And so how am I able to love my neighbors? It doesn't happen. And so let me build up my own self-respect. Then I can respect other human beings. Then I can respect the laws of the world. Then I can respect all forms of life. And I can respect the spiritual laws, the natural laws of the universe. Will that resolve the problems of today? Definitely. So can I come back to respecting nature? Yes, definitely. We can do it together. So I know that I sort of dived in at the deep end, bringing in the subject of God. But I think these are the two critical things we need to be aware of. Who am I? And who am I connected with eternally. And if we get those two things right, our life now, here at this moment, will be a much, much happier life, because I'd have the stability to go through all the different things that are happening in the world out there, which affect all of us. Nobody's free from it. We're all impacted by this. But if I have the inner capacity to absorb things and deal with them, I can move further ahead. So thank you for your patience. You've been listening very carefully. I appreciate that. And we move on to the next step.
Now. Thank you so much, Sister Jayanti. It was such a wonderful, timely topic. And the concepts that we discussed, whether it's the identity of the self, building the relationship with the divine, the word coping. I love the equation that half multiplied by half doesn't lead to a one, it leads to 1/4. And then the relationship with climate and self-love. So as we get started on our Q&A, I'll start off with a question, and then we can take questions from the audience as well. So I'd like to explore a little more about what you were mentioning about coping. And it seems these days the word fatigue or tiredness has become such a common thing. Almost everybody feels like they are battling relationships, battling work, battling economic, political situations. It almost feels like they're just exhausted. And, so with these, it's almost like they are tired warriors. Now, it's such a time, how should that tired warrior, when they're so busy fighting, pause to think whether they actually love themselves, let alone have a relationship with God? The concentric circles are shrinking. If you could explore, talk a little bit about that.
I'm sure it's a very, very common experience to wake up feeling tired rather than feeling refreshed. And you don't have to answer me, but I'm sure that that happens more times than we would like it to. Even once is too much, but it happens more than once. And I think it's because it's not just the physical fatigue, but it's more the mental fatigue. And that's very much connected with, what am I doing in here? And overthinking has become, I think, a big issue today. We worry too much, we get very anxious, and it drains us of our energy. And if I could conserve my energy, then I would be able to have greater joy, greater energy, greater enthusiasm for life, and be able to give something to others also, instead of just feeling depleted all the time. We've forgotten that we can actually take charge of our minds. We tend to think the mind has an existence of its own. But in fact, just as I have hands and feet, and my hands and feet will probably obey what I tell them to do, there might be issues with all sorts of things, but when the person is healthy, then you expect that your hands and feet will do what you want them to do. Can I start thinking about the inner being and the faculties that I have? I, the inner being, the soul, have a mind. I, the inner being, the soul, have a personality. I, the inner being, have an intellect. And each one of these faculties have a different role. But for now, let me just focus on the mind, my thoughts and my feelings. Can I take charge of my mind just as I take charge of my hands and feet? And it means that I have to study a little, I have to understand a little bit. But once I understand that I, the soul, am separate to this body, and I, the soul, actually have the power and the authority to put a full stop to wasteful thinking or negative thinking. And just as if somebody's had an injury, then they have to start experimenting with their hands. The hand won't instantly obey. There's something that's gone wrong. And so gradually, I have to learn to exercise. And after some time, I'm happy. I can take charge of my hand again. Same thing. We've forgotten about the muscle of the mind and how to exercise this inner muscle. And so a wasteful thought starts with why, how, if, but, why not, maybe. And the thought comes and it leads me into 1,000 different thoughts that have been just a waste of energy. And at the end of 15 minutes, or maybe even 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I realize I've spent the last period of time just wasting my energy in a direction that's not going to be of any use. Constructive thinking, creative thinking, positive thinking, planning is different to just going round and around and around in a circle that's leading me nowhere. And so to be able to have that power to make my muscle of the mind start functioning, I need to learn to meditate. And then I can even recognize what is a waste thought. Before I start meditation, I don't even know what are waste thoughts. And so even to identify that and then to say, okay, full stop, stop. It's not worth going down that road. I'm going to do something else, something different, find a different answer.
You have any questions in the audience?
So
I have a 23-year-old son, and several years ago, one of the saddest things I ever heard him say was, I don't know what to believe anymore. And you spoke so eloquently about stewardship of the garden and of nature. I'm wondering about stewardship of information. It seems like there's a plethora of information, and there are many people trying to manipulate technology in order to manipulate our minds. I'm wondering, in your spiritual structure, how you see the plethora of information and the people who are trying to manipulate it in order to bring us in directions that maybe we shouldn't go.
You've touched on a very, very crucial point. What's happened is that there's so much information that comes to it with not always the right motive. And so in the awareness of who I am, I'm in charge of that aspect of the being that is the intellect. I'm using the word intellect, but let me define what I mean. That capacity that I have as a human being to evaluate and then be able to decide what I'm going to retain and what is it that's not of value and of use to me. And we've lost this because we're not in touch with ourselves and we're not in touch with the divine. And so once I start filling myself with power from the divine, then one of the very quick results of this is that I learn to discern more clearly. Useful, not useful. Valuable, not valuable. Real or false. With the intellect totally depleted of energy, we don't know what to believe anymore. And the other aspect of this is where there's so much choice we have, and yet we don't have enough wisdom with which to make our choice. That again leads to this inner discontent and dissatisfaction with the self, and even my self-esteem going down, and not knowing what to believe in anymore. And so again, giving myself space to know myself and to know the divine, and to start connecting with the divine, so that I take that power to stop all the clutter from getting even more cluttered. But firstly, just to stop it, and then to try and declutter and remove whatever I now understand to be wasteful. But yes, a very, very big topic. There's a word we use to describe the conditions of the world today, Kali Yuga, the dark age, the iron age, Kali Yuga. But what we see is that after the dark night, the day comes. And so it's not a message of despair, but rather a message of hope, that there is a moment of change happening. We are in that very interesting period of transition from the dark night to the world of light, the age of truth, Sat Yuga. And so I hope that'll be the message you carry away.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Thank you so much. Similarly to the audience, I think everything that you said was so profound. So thank you. And I have a question, personal question. So what if one has the awareness, one struggles with consistency and discipline, with habit formation? Okay, sorry. Now, can you hear me? So what if one's trying to cultivate consistency and discipline with habit formation? Do you have any suggestions and or guidance for that?
Discipline. Not a word that people like today. But if I start a discipline of giving time to myself, preferably early in the morning, before you start your day's activity, so that the mind is fresh, it's clear, and you follow a discipline and practice whatever it is that your path suggests to you. But practice that time for silence, for meditation, for contemplation. And secondly, feed your mind good food every morning, so that it gives you the energy and sets the compass straight, and you know where to go today.
Anybody else? So I can take the next one, sister. So what you were talking about, the message of hope. So my question is, how do you see the hope or the gifts in this environment? When you do see the darkness, how do you and where do you see the dawn? If you could
if I can connect with the goodness within, then every single story that you've heard It's not just a fairy story, it's not just a myth, it's not just legends, but it is the story of humanity, that good will always conquer evil. Do you believe that? Who believes that? Good. And so when I see goodness within myself and I connect with those original qualities, and it can happen within a few minutes of meditation, and it doesn't take a whole lifetime to learn to meditate, it takes just a short time. And if I can connect with that goodness, that's it. I know that there's hope for the future. I know that all I have to do is to stay connected, and it's going to grow, and that light is going to shine. A room full of darkness is a bit daunting, but light one candle, just one little candle, and immediately there's light. You don't have to fight the darkness. You don't have to sweep it away. You don't have to chase it away. Just light a candle. And so as soon as the soul is lit, is awake, is aware, that's it. And from one candle, how many candles can you light? It's a whole row. Maybe 1,000 candles can be lit by one candle. And so definitely there's hope for the future.
I think, Sister, we can take one question which we've received from our Zoom audience.
So I just read it out. This is from Sister Meena. She's asking, there was a discussion about relationship and tolerance. Sister also talked about giving and giving to the point of depleting yourself. It does not allow time for self-care because of the abusive situation. Is it not better to separate yourself from the situation?
It's such a personal decision, and it involves whether there are other people. I'm thinking about one particular situation of a family. And so to separate in a family, what about the children? What about their future? There's many, many other factors that come in. And so for me, the red line between how far do I tolerate and continue to tolerate, and at what point do I make a decision that tolerance is not the right path, but I have to face the situation and actually take a different direction. That red line for me is, are my principles being impacted? If I can still stay within the family and uphold my own principles of self-care, of the life that I would like to have, then I can draw power and stay. But if my principles are being impacted and I'm not able to care for myself, then yes, it's a very difficult situation, but perhaps that would be one in which I make a decision that it's time to separate. But as I say, it's not a question of one answer fits all situations. You really have to think about it carefully and talk to somebody who you trust, who understands your personal situation.